When my mother called demanding I pay $15,000 for my sister's wedding, then uninvited me 3 days later because I wasn't family enough to deserve a seat at the reception, I made one phone call that changed everything. What might I happened next exposed 27 years of favoritism, manipulation, and financial exploitation that I had been too blind to see. But sometimes the best revenge is simply telling the truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Standing in my corner office at Meridian Financial Group, overlooking the bustling streets of downtown Charlotte, I should have felt proud of everything I had accomplished. At 27, I was the youngest senior financial analyst in the company's history, with a master's degree from Duke University and a salary that my parents still could not quite believe their youngest daughter was earning. The mahogany desk displayed my latest performance award, the wall showcased my professional certifications, and my calendar was filled with client meetings that would generate significant revenue for the firm. Yet, as I stared at my phone after ending the call with my mother, I felt the familiar weight of family expectations and disappointments that had followed me since childhood. The conversation had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, but it had managed to transport me back 2 decades to the dining room table, where I had always sat in the shadow of my older sister, Victoria's achievements, and my parents' unwavering devotion to her success. My mother's voice had carried that particular tone of authority mixed with assumed compliance that I had heard countless times throughout my life. "Catherine, I need to discuss Victoria's wedding arrangements with you. The venue requires final payment next week, and we need your contribution to complete the financial obligations." There had been no question in her phrasing, no request for my willingness to participate, simply an expectation that I would provide whatever amount they deemed necessary for my sister's perfect day. Victoria's engagement to James Whitmore had been announced 6 months earlier during a family dinner that resembled a business presentation more than a celebration. My parents had invited extended family members, close friends, and several of my father's business associates to hear the news that their eldest daughter would be marrying into one of Charlotte's most prominent real estate development families. The evening had been orchestrated with the precision of a corporate merger announcement, complete with printed engagement photographs and preliminary wedding plans that my mother had apparently been developing since Victoria's high school graduation. The wedding itself was planned as a social event that would establish my parents' position within Charlotte's business community while showcasing Victoria's transformation from their daughter into a member of the Whitmore family legacy. The venue was Ashford Manor, an exclusive estate that typically hosted corporate retreats and charity galas for the city's most influential families. The guest list included 300 individuals, ranging from my father's construction company clients to Victoria's sorority sisters from University of North Carolina, where she had studied communications before settling into a comfortable position at a boutique marketing firm owned by one of my mother's tennis partners. During the months of wedding planning, I had been peripherally involved in discussions about floral arrangements, catering selections, and entertainment options that would create the sophisticated atmosphere my parents envisioned. My role had been primarily as a sounding board for my mother's increasingly elaborate ideas and as a source of practical advice about budgeting and financial planning that could accommodate the expanding scope of their vision. The conversations had been pleasant enough, though I had noticed that my input was sought mainly when cost-saving measures needed to be identified or when complex financial arrangements required professional analysis. My relationship with Victoria had always been complicated by the 5-year age difference that had placed us in different developmental stages throughout our childhood and adolescence. While I was navigating elementary school mathematics and spelling tests, she was already establishing herself as the social center of her high school class, with a steady stream of boyfriends, party invitations, and leadership positions that seemed to come naturally to her outgoing personality. By the time I reached high school, Victoria was already in college, creating enough distance that we rarely occupied the same social or academic spheres. The differences between us had become more pronounced as we entered adulthood and began establishing our respective careers and personal lives. Victoria's approach to professional development had been strategic in ways that leveraged her social connections and natural charisma to create opportunities that required minimal technical expertise or intensive preparation. Her marketing position allowed her to utilize interpersonal skills while maintaining a comfortable work-life balance that accommodated her active social calendar and relationship with James, whom she had met during a charity fundraiser where his family was the primary sponsor. My career path had been more traditionally demanding, requiring extensive education, professional certifications, and the development of technical expertise that could compete effectively in the financial services industry. The master's degree from Duke had been earned through evening classes while working full-time at a regional investment firm, a schedule that had required sacrificing most social activities and personal relationships for 3 years. The progression from entry-level analyst to senior financial analyst had been achieved through consistently exceeding performance targets and developing specialized knowledge in commercial real estate financing that had become increasingly valuable as Charlotte's development market expanded. The contrast between our career trajectories had created subtle tensions during family gatherings, where Victoria's success was measured in terms of social connections and relationship milestones, while my achievements were acknowledged in more practical terms related to financial stability and professional advancement. My parents had always been proud of both daughters, but their pride manifested differently based on what they perceived as our respective strengths and contributions to the family's overall social and economic position. Victoria's engagement had shifted family dynamics in ways that I had not initially recognized as significant. The wedding planning process had become a consuming focus for my mother, who saw the event as an opportunity to demonstrate our family's social standing and financial capabilities to the broader Charlotte community. The guest list included several families whose approval my parents had been seeking for years, business associates whose relationships could benefit my father's construction company, and social connections that could enhance their position within the country club and charitable organization circles they frequented. The financial requirements for achieving my mother's vision of the perfect wedding had escalated steadily throughout the planning process. Initial budget estimates had been conservative, focusing on essential elements like venue rental, catering, and photography that could create a memorable event without excessive expense. However, as the guest list expanded and my mother's expectations became more elaborate, the costs had increased to levels that strained my parents' available resources, while threatening to compromise the sophisticated atmosphere they wanted to create. My father's construction business had experienced a profitable year, but the success had been tied to specific projects that were nearing completion, creating uncertainty about future revenue streams that could support the level of spending my mother was planning. Additionally, my parents had recently invested in a vacation property at Hilton Head Island, a purchase that had required significant financial commitment and limited their available liquid assets for unexpected expenses or major purchases. The conversation about my financial contribution to the wedding had begun casually during a Sunday dinner at my parents' home in the exclusive Dilworth neighborhood. My mother had mentioned that the wedding expenses were approaching the upper limit of their comfortable spending range and wondered whether I might be willing to assist with certain aspects of the celebration. The request had been presented as an opportunity for me to contribute to my sister's special day, while demonstrating my appreciation for the family support I had received throughout my education and career development. Initially, the suggestion had seemed reasonable and even touching, representing a chance to participate meaningfully in Victoria's wedding, while helping my parents achieve their vision for the celebration. I had agreed to contribute $5,000 toward the reception costs, an amount that represented a significant portion of my discretionary income, but felt appropriate given the importance of the occasion and my genuine desire to support my sister's happiness. However, the financial contribution had apparently established a precedent that my mother had interpreted as willingness to assume whatever additional expenses might be required to complete the wedding arrangements. Over the following weeks, the requests had become more frequent and more substantial, covering everything from upgraded floral arrangements to premium bar service to transportation for out-of-town guests who required special accommodation to maintain the event's elegant atmosphere. Each request had been accompanied by explanations about the importance of maintaining consistency in the wedding's overall quality and the potential embarrassment that could result from economizing on details that guests would notice and remember. My mother had developed a talent for presenting these additional expenses as essential elements that could not be eliminated without compromising the success of the entire celebration, while simultaneously suggesting that my professional success and financial stability made me the natural person to ensure that Victoria's special day met the standards that our family's reputation required. The pattern had continued until the phone call that afternoon, when my mother had informed me that the final venue payment required an additional $15,000 beyond what my parents had already provided, and that my contribution was necessary to complete the arrangements. The amount had been presented as a fait accompli, with no discussion of whether I was willing or able to provide such a substantial sum, and no consideration of the impact that this expense would have on my own financial planning and personal objectives. The assumption that I would comply with this request had been so complete that my mother had already informed the venue coordinator that the final payment would be submitted within the week, creating a commitment that would affect my sister's wedding plans if I declined to participate. The manipulation had been subtle but effective, using my concern for Victoria's happiness and my parents' reputation to create pressure for compliance that would be difficult to resist without appearing selfish or unsupportive of family obligations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Standing in my office after ending the call, I realized that the wedding payment demand represented something much larger than a simple financial request. It was the culmination of years of family dynamics that had consistently placed my sister's needs and desires ahead of my own, while simultaneously expecting me to provide the resources necessary to maintain the lifestyle and social position that my parents had established as their priority. The pattern had been so gradual and so consistently reinforced that I had never questioned the fundamental unfairness of the arrangement until the magnitude of this latest request had forced me to confront the reality of my position within the family structure. The irony was that my financial success, which should have provided independence and respect within the family hierarchy, had instead made me a resource to be utilized for achieving goals that primarily benefited others. My education, career, advancement, and professional achievements had been transformed from personal accomplishments into family assets that could be leveraged to support my parents' social ambitions and my sister's lifestyle preferences. The recognition and pride that should have accompanied my success had been overshadowed by expectations that I would use my resources to enhance other people's opportunities and experiences. The realization was both liberating and terrifying, as it suggested that breaking free from these expectations would require confronting family relationships and dynamics that had been established over decades. The comfortable pattern of compliance and contribution had provided a sense of belonging and family connection, even if the arrangement had been fundamentally unequal and unsustainable. Challenging the expectations would risk creating conflict and potentially damaging relationships that, despite their problems, had provided stability and continuity throughout my adult life. As I sat in my office contemplating the implications of my mother's request, I began to understand that this moment represented a critical decision point that would determine the direction of my relationships with my family for years to come. The choice was not simply about whether to provide $15,000 for Victoria's wedding, but about whether I would continue accepting a role that prioritized other people's needs and desires over my own financial security and personal objectives, or whether I would finally establish boundaries that reflected my actual value and contributions to the family dynamic. The wedding payment demand had crystallized years of gradual boundary erosion and financial exploitation that I had been too invested in family harmony to recognize or address effectively. The pattern had been established through smaller requests and expectations that had seemed reasonable individually, but had collectively created a dynamic where my resources and success were viewed as family assets rather than personal achievements. The $15,000 demand was simply the latest and most egregious example of a system that had been operating for years without my conscious recognition or consent. Looking out at the Charlotte skyline from my office window, I realized that my professional success had been built on principles of fairness, accountability, and mutual respect that were completely absent from my family relationships. The clients I served expected transparency in financial arrangements, clear boundaries regarding professional obligations, and equitable treatment that reflected their contributions and investments. Yet I had been accepting family dynamics that violated every principle I considered essential for healthy business relationships, simply because the exploitation had been gradual and disguised as family loyalty and support. The recognition that my family had been treating me as a resource rather than a person was both painful and empowering, as it suggested that the solution was within my control if I was willing to accept the consequences of establishing appropriate boundaries. The $15,000 wedding payment demand represented an opportunity to break the pattern of financial exploitation while demonstrating that my success and resources were not available for unlimited use by family members who had never reciprocated the support and consideration they consistently requested from me. The decision I made in that moment would determine whether I continued accepting diminished status within my family hierarchy or whether I finally claimed the respect and equal treatment that my achievements and contributions had earned. The wedding payment demand was about to become the catalyst for a transformation that would affect every aspect of my relationship with my parents and sister. But for the first time in my adult life, I felt ready to prioritize my own interests and values over the comfortable but unsustainable pattern of family compliance that had defined our relationships for too long. The first red flag should have been the way my mother announced Victoria's engagement at my own birthday celebration. I had turned 26 that March, and for the first time in years, I had actually planned something special for myself. After landing the promotion to senior analyst and finally paying off the last of my Duke student loans, I felt like I had something worth celebrating. I had reserved a private dining room at the Capitol Grill, invited 12 of my closest friends and colleagues, and even splurged on a designer dress that made me feel confident and successful. The evening had been perfect until my parents arrived with Victoria and James in tow. Within 10 minutes of their entrance, my mother had somehow managed to redirect the entire conversation away from my professional achievements and toward Victoria's exciting news about James proposing during their weekend getaway to Asheville. The engagement ring was passed around the table while my birthday cake sat forgotten, and suddenly my celebration had become an impromptu engagement party where I played the role of gracious hostess to my sister's moment of triumph. I remember sitting there, watching my friends congratulate Victoria, while my carefully planned birthday dinner transformed into background scenery for her announcement. The irony was not lost on me that even on the one day that was supposed to be exclusively mine, Victoria's news took precedence and my achievements became secondary considerations. Yet at the time, I rationalized the situation as coincidental timing and family excitement that would naturally overshadow routine birthday celebrations. Dr. Amanda Richardson, my mentor from Duke's Business School, had been among the guests that evening. She pulled me aside during the dessert course and asked quietly whether I was comfortable with how the evening had evolved. Her question surprised me because I had not consciously acknowledged my disappointment about the celebration being hijacked, instead focusing on appearing supportive and enthusiastic about Victoria's engagement. Dr. Richardson's observation planted the first seed of awareness that the family dynamics I considered normal might actually be problematic patterns that warranted closer examination. The weeks following that dinner brought a series of similar incidents that began to establish a troubling precedent for wedding-related expectations. My mother started calling me regularly to discuss venues, catering options, and budget considerations for Victoria's wedding, treating me as a combination financial advisor and logistical coordinator, rather than simply the bride's sister. These conversations initially felt like natural inclusion in family planning, but gradually revealed assumptions about my role and responsibilities that I had never explicitly agreed to undertake. The first direct financial request came during a lunch meeting at the country club where my mother belonged. She had invited me to discuss wedding planning progress and to seek my professional opinion about managing the various expenses that were accumulating as their vision became more elaborate. The conversation had been pleasant and collaborative, until she mentioned that the floral arrangements they wanted would exceed their allocated budget by approximately $3,000. Rather than asking whether I would be willing to contribute toward this expense, she simply stated that my expertise in financial planning would help them determine the best way to accommodate the additional cost. When I suggested several cost-saving alternatives that could achieve similar aesthetic results without exceeding their budget, my mother's response revealed the true nature of her expectations. She explained that Victoria had set her heart on specific floral designs that would coordinate perfectly with the overall wedding theme, and that compromising on these details would diminish the elegance they were trying to achieve. The implication was clear that my role was to solve the financial problem rather than to suggest modifications that might require Victoria to adjust her expectations. I agreed to contribute the $3,000 for the floral arrangements, telling myself that supporting my sister's wedding was a meaningful way to demonstrate family loyalty and to participate in creating a beautiful celebration. However, the ease with which my mother accepted this contribution, without expressions of gratitude or acknowledgement of the sacrifice it represented, suggested that my financial assistance was being treated as an expected resource rather than a generous gift from a caring sister. The pattern intensified over the following months as wedding planning progressed, and my mother's vision became increasingly ambitious. Requests for my input on various decisions invariably led to discussions about funding shortfalls that required creative solutions, with my financial contribution consistently presented as the most practical option. The language used in these conversations was always respectful and appreciative, but the underlying assumption was that my professional success had created obligations to support family goals that took precedence over my personal financial objectives. Meanwhile, my relationship with Victoria became increasingly strained as she embraced her role as the bride-to-be with an intensity that left little room for other family dynamics or relationships. Our monthly sister lunches, which had been a cherished tradition since she moved back to Charlotte, became wedding planning sessions where I was expected to provide enthusiasm and support for decisions that had already been made without my consultation. Victoria's conversation focused exclusively on dress fittings, venue decorations, honeymoon plans, and guest list considerations that seemed to consume her entire emotional and intellectual capacity. The most troubling aspect of these interactions was Victoria's apparent assumption that everyone in her orbit should share her level of investment in wedding preparations and should be willing to accommodate whatever adjustments or sacrifices might be necessary to ensure her perfect day. When I mentioned during one lunch that I was considering a vacation to Europe that summer, Victoria's immediate response was concern about whether my travel plans would conflict with wedding-related commitments or pre-wedding events that required my attendance and participation. My father's behavior during this period provided additional insight into family dynamics that I had not previously recognized as problematic. His construction business was experiencing significant success, but rather than using this financial stability to fully fund Victoria's wedding, he seemed to view the celebration as an opportunity to demonstrate fiscal responsibility by involving other family members in sharing the expenses. His conversations with me about the wedding consistently emphasized the importance of family members supporting each other and contributing according to their capabilities and resources. The logic seemed reasonable on its surface, but closer examination revealed that the expectation of financial contribution was being applied selectively based on perceived ability to pay, rather than on actual relationship to the bride or desire to participate in wedding expenses. Victoria's future in-laws were not being asked to contribute to wedding costs, nor were other family members with significant assets being approached for financial assistance. The burden of supporting my parents' ambitious wedding plans was falling disproportionately on me because my professional success had made me the most obvious source of additional funding. Dr. Richardson's perspective during our quarterly mentorship meetings provided valuable external insight into these developing patterns. She listened carefully as I described the increasing frequency of wedding-related financial requests and the assumption that my career success had created family obligations that I had never consciously accepted. Her questions focused on whether these contributions were voluntary gifts that I felt good about providing, or whether they represented expectations that made me uncomfortable but felt difficult to refuse without creating family conflict. Her observations about healthy family financial dynamics were eye-opening. Dr. Richardson explained that successful individuals often face pressure from family members who view their achievements as shared resources rather than personal accomplishments, and that establishing clear boundaries about financial contributions was essential for maintaining both family relationships and personal financial security. She suggested that genuine family support should enhance rather than compromise individual success, and that requests for financial assistance should always include gracious acceptance of whatever level of contribution felt comfortable and sustainable. The conversation with Dr. Richardson prompted me to examine more carefully the language and assumptions embedded in my family's requests for wedding contributions. I began to notice that my mother's planning conversations consistently treated my financial participation as a given rather than as a choice, and that alternative solutions to budget constraints were dismissed if they required Victoria to modify her expectations or my parents to adjust their spending priorities. The wedding planning process was becoming a systematic transfer of financial responsibility from my parents and sister to me, disguised as family cooperation and shared investment in Victoria's happiness. The breaking point in my awareness came during a family dinner at my parents' house in late fall. The conversation had focused on final wedding preparations, and my mother was expressing satisfaction about how well the planning was progressing, despite the various budget challenges they had encountered. She mentioned several specific ways that my financial contributions had enabled them to maintain the quality and elegance they wanted, and Victoria added her appreciation for my willingness to help make her dream wedding possible. However, the expressions of gratitude were immediately followed by discussion of additional expenses that had emerged during the final planning phases. The transportation for out-of-town guests required upgraded services to maintain the sophisticated atmosphere they had established. The photography package needed enhancement to ensure comprehensive coverage of all wedding events. The rehearsal dinner location required deposits that exceeded their remaining available funds. Each item was presented as an essential element that could not be eliminated without compromising the overall success of the celebration. The cumulative effect of these ongoing requests was the gradual transformation of my role from supportive sister to primary financial sponsor of Victoria's wedding. My parents had shifted from hosting and funding their daughter's celebration to coordinating an event that was increasingly dependent on my resources and financial commitment. Victoria had evolved from grateful recipient of family support to entitled bride whose expectations could not be modified regardless of the financial burden they created for others. Most concerning was my own adaptation to this dynamic, as I had gradually accepted financial responsibility for wedding elements that should have been my parents' obligations or Victoria's choices based on her actual budget constraints. The pattern had been so gradual and so consistently framed in terms of family loyalty and support that I had not recognized the extent to which my financial resources were being redirected toward goals that provided minimal benefit to my own life or objectives. The realization that I had become the primary funding source for Victoria's wedding while having minimal input into planning decisions or meaningful recognition for my contributions was both shocking and liberating. The shock came from understanding how completely I had been manipulated into accepting financial responsibility for other people's dreams and expectations. The liberation came from recognizing that this arrangement was neither inevitable nor permanent, and that I retained the power to establish boundaries that reflected my actual priorities and values. My professional training in financial analysis provided useful perspective on evaluating the wedding funding arrangements as an investment proposition. The resources I was contributing toward Victoria's celebration would provide temporary satisfaction for family members while creating no lasting value or benefit for my own financial security or personal development. The return on investment was essentially zero, with the primary benefit being the avoidance of family conflict that would result from declining to fund other people's lifestyle preferences. More troubling was the recognition that my compliance with these financial expectations was establishing precedents that would likely extend beyond the wedding itself. If I continued accepting responsibility for funding family goals that exceeded my parents' resources, the pattern would probably continue with future requests related to Victoria's housing needs, vacation preferences, or other lifestyle choices that required financial support. My professional success was being transformed into a family resource that could be accessed whenever my parents or sister encountered expenses that exceeded their comfortable spending capacity. The wedding payment requests were also creating opportunity costs that affected my own financial planning and personal objectives. The money I was contributing to Victoria's celebration could have been invested in my own professional development, used for travel experiences that would enhance my personal growth, or saved toward goals like purchasing a home or starting my own business. Instead, these resources were being redirected toward creating one perfect day for my sister while providing no comparable investment in my own future or happiness. Dr. Richardson's advice during our next meeting focused on the importance of recognizing exploitation disguised as family obligation and developing strategies for establishing financial boundaries that protected both my resources and my relationships. She emphasized that healthy families celebrate individual success rather than treating it as a shared resource, and that genuine love and support should never require financial sacrifice that compromises personal security or objectives. Her recommendations included developing clear policies about family financial contributions that could be applied consistently regardless of emotional pressure or manipulation tactics. She suggested that any financial assistance should be offered voluntarily based on my own comfort level and should never be assumed or demanded by family members who had not contributed comparable resources toward my own goals and celebrations. Most importantly, she emphasized that my professional achievements belonged to me and that family members who genuinely supported my success would want to protect rather than exploit the financial security I had worked hard to create. The months of wedding planning had gradually revealed family dynamics that contradicted everything I believed about healthy relationships and mutual support. The experience was teaching me that family loyalty should not require personal sacrifice that benefits others without reciprocal consideration, and that love should enhance rather than compromise individual success and financial security. The wedding was becoming a catalyst for recognizing patterns that extended far beyond this single celebration, and that would continue affecting my life until I developed the courage to establish appropriate boundaries and expectations. The transformation in my mother's approach to wedding planning became unmistakable during the winter months leading up to Victoria's spring celebration. What had begun as occasional requests for financial assistance evolved into systematic expectations that my resources would cover any shortfall between my parents' budget and Victoria's increasingly elaborate vision. The conversations shifted from seeking my opinion about cost-effective alternatives to assuming my willingness to fund whatever expenses were necessary to achieve their desired outcome. The first major escalation occurred during a February planning session at my parents' house, where my mother had arranged a meeting with Evelyn Harper, the wedding coordinator from Ashford Manor. I had been invited to participate in discussions about final arrangements, though I gradually realized that my presence was required primarily to confirm financial commitments that had already been made on my behalf. The meeting began with Ms. Harper reviewing completed arrangements and outstanding items that required final approval and payment authorization. My mother's presentation of the financial arrangements was masterful in its presumption and manipulation. She explained to Ms. Harper that family members were contributing to different aspects of the celebration based on their particular interests and capabilities, with my father handling the venue deposit and catering arrangements, Victoria's future, in-laws managing the bar service and entertainment, and myself covering the floral design, photography enhancement, and transportation coordination. The division sounded reasonable and collaborative until I realized that my assigned responsibilities represented nearly 40% of the total wedding expenses. Ms. Harper proceeded to discuss the specific services that required final confirmation and payment, directing her attention primarily toward me as the coordinator for what she termed the aesthetic and logistical elements of the celebration. The floral arrangements had been expanded to include ceremony decorations, reception centerpieces, and bridal party accessories that exceeded the original estimates by several $1,000s. The photography package had been upgraded to include engagement sessions, rehearsal dinner coverage, and premium album options that doubled the initial contracted amount. The transportation arrangements represented an entirely new category of expense that had not been part of original planning. Discussions. My mother explained that several important out-of-town guests required luxury vehicle service to maintain the sophisticated atmosphere they had established for the celebration. The coordination involved hiring premium transportation companies, arranging multiple pickup locations, and ensuring that arrival timing would coordinate seamlessly with ceremony and reception schedules. My shock at discovering these extensive financial commitments that had been made without my consultation was overshadowed by the skillful way my mother managed the conversation to make questioning them seem inappropriate and disruptive. Ms. Harper was clearly operating under the assumption that I had approved these arrangements, and challenging that assumption would create embarrassment for my mother, while potentially compromising Victoria's wedding plans. The social dynamics of the situation made it nearly impossible to address the financial misrepresentation without appearing unreasonable or unsupportive. Instead, I found myself nodding along with discussions about payment schedules and final coordination details while internally calculating the financial impact of commitments I had never agreed to make. The total amount attributed to my responsibility exceeded $12,000, representing a sum that would significantly affect my personal financial planning and eliminate most of my discretionary spending capacity for the remainder of the year. Yet the conversation proceeded as though my acceptance of these expenses was a foregone conclusion that required no further discussion or confirmation. Victoria's behavior during this meeting provided additional insight into the family dynamics that had enabled this level of financial manipulation to develop unchallenged. She participated actively in discussions about aesthetic details and service enhancements, expressing enthusiasm about arrangements that would create her perfect wedding day, while showing no awareness or concern about the financial burden these preferences were creating for other family members. Her focus remained entirely on achieving the celebration she had envisioned, with little consideration for the cost implications or the fairness of expecting others to fund her vision. The meeting concluded with Ms. Harper providing detailed payment schedules and coordination requirements for the various services that required final confirmation. She handed me a folder containing contracts and payment authorization forms for what she described as my portion of the wedding arrangements, treating these documents as routine administrative requirements rather than substantial financial commitments that warranted careful review and consideration. The assumption that I would simply process these payments without question revealed how completely my role as wedding financier had been established and accepted by everyone involved, except myself. Following the meeting, I attempted to discuss the financial arrangements privately with my mother, seeking clarification about how these extensive commitments had been made without my explicit approval. Her response demonstrated the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had been gradually implemented throughout the wedding planning process. She expressed surprise that I had not understood my expected contribution level, mentioning several previous conversations where these expenses had been discussed as natural extensions of my initial willingness to support Victoria's celebration. My mother's explanation focused on the collaborative nature of family wedding planning and the importance of each family member contributing according to their capabilities and resources. She emphasized that my professional success and financial stability made me the logical choice for handling the more complex and expensive aspects of the celebration, while my parents focused on elements that required their social connections and experience rather than substantial financial investment. The logic was presented as obvious and fair, making my concerns seem petty and selfish. The conversation revealed the extent to which my initial agreement to contribute $3,000 for floral arrangements had been interpreted as blanket authorization for whatever additional expenses might be required to complete the wedding plans. My mother explained that she had assumed my willingness to support Victoria meant that I wanted the celebration to be as beautiful and successful as possible, regardless of the specific dollar amount required. The manipulation was subtle but complete, transforming my limited initial contribution into unlimited financial liability for achieving other people's vision of perfection. Dr. Richardson's reaction when I described these developments during our next mentorship meeting was more concerned than her previous responses to my family situation. She listened carefully as I explained the financial commitments that had been made on my behalf and the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had been used to make questioning them seem inappropriate and disruptive. Her questions focused on whether I had received any written documentation of these arrangements and whether clear boundaries had been established regarding my maximum contribution level. Her analysis of the situation was both validating and alarming. Dr. Richardson explained that the tactics my family was using represented classic financial manipulation strategies that were often employed in toxic family dynamics, where one successful member becomes viewed as a resource rather than as an individual with personal financial goals and limitations. She emphasized that healthy family support should enhance rather than compromise individual financial security, and that genuine celebration should be planned within available resources rather than depending on exploitation of family members who had not voluntarily agreed to fund other people's dreams. The conversation with Dr. Richardson included practical advice about establishing financial boundaries and managing family expectations that had been allowed to develop unchecked. She recommended creating written documentation of any financial contributions I was actually willing to make, establishing clear maximum amounts that could not be exceeded regardless of emotional pressure or manipulation tactics, and developing responses to requests for additional funding that could be delivered consistently without creating excessive family conflict. Most importantly, Dr. Richardson emphasized that my professional achievements belonged to me, and that family members who genuinely supported my success would want to protect rather than exploit the financial security I had worked hard to create. She explained that true family love should celebrate individual accomplishments rather than treating them as shared resources, and that requests for financial assistance should always include gracious acceptance of whatever contribution level felt comfortable and sustainable. The weeks following this conversation brought additional escalations that confirmed Dr. Richardson's analysis of my family's manipulation tactics. My mother began calling more frequently to discuss wedding details that invariably led to new financial requirements or enhancements to previously approved arrangements. These conversations were always framed in terms of ensuring Victoria's happiness and maintaining the quality standards that our family's reputation required, making resistance seem selfish and unsupportive. The bachelor and bachelorette party arrangements provided another example of how my financial responsibility continued expanding beyond any reasonable limits. Victoria had initially planned a modest celebration with her college friends, but my mother had encouraged her to expand the event to include a weekend getaway that would accommodate the social expectations of James's family and social circle. The enhanced celebration required resort accommodations, professional party planning services, and premium entertainment options that transformed a simple gathering into an elaborate production. My mother approached me about funding the bachelorette party enhancements with the same presumptive language that had characterized previous financial requests. She explained that Victoria deserved a celebration that matched the sophistication of her wedding, and that my contribution would demonstrate the family unity and support that James's family would expect to see. The request was presented as an opportunity to show my love for Victoria, rather than as an additional financial burden that exceeded any reasonable expectation of sisterly support. The amount required for the bachelorette party arrangements was nearly $4,000, bringing my total wedding-related expenses to over $16,000 without including the original venue payment that had prompted this entire financial commitment. The cumulative impact was beginning to affect my personal financial planning in ways that would require significant adjustments to my savings goals, investment contributions, and discretionary spending for months to come. Victoria's response, when I attempted to discuss the escalating expenses, revealed the extent to which she had been protected from understanding the true cost of her wedding celebrations. She seemed genuinely surprised that the various enhancements and upgrades carried substantial price tags, having been encouraged by my mother to focus on aesthetic and experiential elements rather than financial implications. Her assumption that family members would naturally provide whatever funding was necessary reflected a level of entitlement and financial naivety that my parents had apparently encouraged rather than corrected. The conversation with Victoria became more revealing when I suggested that some of the planned enhancements might be modified to reduce the overall expense burden on family members. Her immediate response was disappointment and concern that compromising on any element of her wedding celebration would diminish the perfection she had been planning for months. She explained that James's family had certain social expectations and that meeting those standards was essential for establishing her position within their social circle and community. Victoria's explanation revealed another layer of the family dynamics that had created pressure for increasingly elaborate wedding arrangements. My parents viewed the celebration as an opportunity to demonstrate their social and financial status to James's family and their broader social network. The wedding was serving as a public statement about our family's position within Charlotte's business and social community, with my financial contributions enabling my parents to project success and sophistication that exceeded their actual resources. The realization that my money was being used to fund my parents' social ambitions, rather than simply to support Victoria's happiness, added another dimension to the exploitation I had been experiencing. The wedding expenses were creating social and business benefits for my father's construction company, enhancing my mother's position within her country club and charitable organization circles, and establishing Victoria's credibility within her future husband's family network. Meanwhile, my financial sacrifice was providing no comparable benefit to my own social, professional, or personal objectives. My professional training in financial analysis provided useful frameworks for evaluating the wedding arrangements as an investment proposition from my perspective. The resources I was contributing would create temporary satisfaction and social benefits for other family members, while providing no lasting value or return for my own financial security or personal development. The opportunity cost included foregone investments in my own professional development, personal experiences, and financial security that would have generated meaningful long-term benefits. The spring wedding timeline was creating additional pressure to finalize financial commitments and make payments that would lock in my contribution regardless of any subsequent concerns or boundary-setting efforts I might attempt. My mother's coordination with vendors and service providers had created a network of expectations and commitments that would be difficult to modify without creating significant disruption to Victoria's celebration and potential embarrassment for my parents within their social network. The complexity of unwinding the financial arrangements that had been made on my behalf was becoming a significant factor in my decision-making process. Challenging the established commitments would require confronting not only my family members, but also wedding vendors who had been operating under assumptions about payment authorization that my mother had created through careful manipulation of facts and circumstances. The social and professional consequences of backing out of these arrangements seemed almost as daunting as the financial burden of fulfilling them. However, the continued escalation of expenses and expectations was making it clear that accepting the current level of financial exploitation would likely establish precedents for future family dynamics that would be even more damaging to my financial security and personal autonomy. The wedding was becoming a test case for whether I would continue allowing my professional success to be treated as a family resource, or whether I would finally establish boundaries that protected my individual achievements and financial independence. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning in March when I opened my email to find 3 vendor invoices forwarded from my mother, each marked urgent payment required, and totaling an additional $7,000 in wedding expenses I had never approved. The invoices covered upgraded linens for the reception tables, premium sound equipment for the ceremony, and enhanced lighting design that would create what the vendor described as cinematic ambiance for Victoria's special day. Each invoice contained detailed descriptions of services that had been ordered weeks earlier, with payment terms that indicated my mother had provided my contact information as the responsible party for these expenses. The systematic nature of these financial commitments revealed the full scope of the manipulation that had been occurring throughout the wedding planning process. My mother had been presenting my financial participation to vendors as established fact rather than as voluntary contribution, creating binding obligations that would be difficult to challenge without damaging both Victoria's wedding plans and my parents' reputation within the Charlotte business community. The vendor relationships had been structured to make my compliance with these financial demands seem inevitable rather than optional. I spent the morning analyzing each invoice and researching the vendors to understand the full extent of the commitments that had been made on my behalf. The upgraded linens represented a luxury enhancement that would provide minimal visual impact while adding substantial cost to the reception arrangements. The premium sound equipment exceeded what would be necessary for effective ceremony audio, instead providing professional-grade technology that would accommodate live music performances and sophisticated entertainment presentations. The enhanced lighting design transformed the venue into what essentially amounted to a professional event production rather than a traditional wedding celebration. The cumulative financial commitment these invoices represented brought my total wedding-related expenses to over $23,000, an amount that exceeded my annual discretionary spending capacity and would require significant adjustments to my investment contributions and savings goals. More troubling was the recognition that this pattern of unauthorized commitments could continue indefinitely, with additional vendors and service providers being told that I would cover whatever expenses were necessary to achieve my family's vision of the perfect celebration. The decision to confront this systematic financial exploitation required careful preparation and strategic thinking that drew upon my professional experience in managing complex business negotiations. I spent the remainder of that Tuesday documenting all wedding-related expenses that had been attributed to me, researching my legal obligations regarding these vendor commitments, and developing a communication strategy that would address the underlying manipulation while minimizing damage to family relationships and Victoria's wedding plans. My analysis revealed that most of the vendor agreements had been structured as verbal commitments with payment guarantees that were not legally binding without my explicit written authorization. The invoices represented requests for payment rather than enforceable debts, providing an opportunity to challenge the financial arrangements without creating legal complications. However, the social and family relationship implications of refusing to honor these commitments would be substantial and would require careful navigation to avoid creating permanent damage to family dynamics. The conversation with my mother that evening began with my presentation of the 3 invoices and a direct question about how these substantial financial commitments had been made without my knowledge or approval. Her initial response followed the familiar pattern of expressing surprise that I had not understood these expenses were natural extensions of my previous contributions, combined with explanations about the importance of maintaining quality standards throughout all aspects of Victoria's celebration. When I pressed for specific information about how my authorization for these expenses had been communicated to vendors, my mother's explanations became more elaborate and less credible. She suggested that our previous conversations about supporting Victoria's wedding had established general approval for whatever enhancements might be necessary to ensure the celebration's success. The vendor commitments, she explained, had been made based on her understanding of my willingness to contribute whatever amount would be required to achieve our family's vision for the event. My response marked the first time I had directly challenged the financial manipulation that had been occurring throughout the wedding planning process. I explained clearly that my initial agreement to contribute $3,000 for floral arrangements had never constituted authorization for unlimited wedding expenses, and that the systematic expansion of my financial responsibility without explicit approval represented a serious breach of trust that could not continue without formal agreement and clear boundaries. The conversation revealed the sophisticated rationalization system my mother had developed to justify the ongoing financial exploitation. She explained that family members naturally support each other according to their capabilities and resources, and that my professional success had created both opportunities and obligations to contribute meaningfully to family celebrations and goals. The wedding represented a chance for me to demonstrate my love for Victoria, while helping our family achieve social recognition that would benefit everyone's long-term interests. My mother's presentation of these arguments demonstrated her skill at transforming exploitation into apparent family loyalty and mutual support. She emphasized the temporary nature of the wedding expenses, compared to the lasting benefits that Victoria's successful marriage would create for our entire family's social and business connections. The financial sacrifice I was being asked to make was framed as an investment in family relationships and social positioning that would provide returns through enhanced reputation and expanded opportunities for everyone involved. The most revealing aspect of this conversation was my mother's genuine surprise at my resistance to these financial arrangements. She had apparently become so comfortable with the pattern of presumptive financial commitments that my questioning of the system seemed unreasonable and ungrateful rather than an appropriate response to systematic exploitation. Her expectation that I would simply continue providing whatever funding was necessary had become so deeply embedded that alternatives to this arrangement had not been seriously considered. When I stated clearly that I would not be paying the $7,000 in additional invoices without explicit discussion and agreement regarding each expense, my mother's response shifted from persuasion to emotional manipulation. She expressed disappointment that I would prioritize money over Victoria's happiness, particularly during such an important time in her life, when family support was most crucial. The conversation concluded with warnings about the potential damage that my financial restrictions could create for Victoria's wedding plans and our family's reputation within the community. The following morning brought a phone call from Victoria that revealed how quickly information about my resistance to ongoing financial commitments had been communicated within the family. Her conversation began with expressions of concern about potential disruptions to her wedding plans, followed by emotional appeals about the importance of family unity during her engagement period. Victoria's approach combined hurt feelings with subtle pressure designed to make me reconsider my position. Regarding the disputed vendor invoices, Victoria's understanding of the financial arrangements that had been made on her behalf was limited and somewhat distorted, reflecting her protection from the practical realities of funding her elaborate wedding celebration. She knew that various family members were contributing to different aspects of the event, but she had not been informed about the specific dollar amounts or the extent to which my resources were covering costs that should have been my parents' responsibility. Her conversation focused on the emotional impact of potential wedding modifications rather than on the fairness of the underlying financial arrangements. The discussion with Victoria provided an opportunity to educate her about the true cost of the wedding enhancements she had been encouraged to expect, and the unreasonable burden these expenses were creating for family members who had not been consulted about their willingness to fund such elaborate arrangements. I explained the cumulative financial impact of the various upgrades and enhancements that had been ordered without my approval, emphasizing that responsible wedding planning should occur within available budgets rather than depending on unlimited family contributions. Victoria's reaction to this information revealed the extent to which she had been shielded from financial reality throughout the wedding planning process. She expressed genuine shock at learning that her preferred arrangements would cost over $23,000 in contributions from me alone, having been led to believe that the various enhancements represented modest improvements rather than substantial financial commitments. Her surprise suggested that my parents had been managing the wedding planning information to prevent her from understanding the true cost implications of her choices. The conversation with Victoria concluded with her agreement to discuss wedding, budget constraints with our parents, and to consider modifications that would reduce the financial burden on family members who had not explicitly agreed to fund elaborate celebrations. However, her obvious disappointment about potentially compromising her vision for the perfect wedding day indicated that family pressure for me to simply provide the necessary funding would likely continue and potentially intensify as the wedding date approached. Dr. Richardson's response to these developments during our next mentorship meeting was supportive of the boundary-setting approach I had begun implementing, while providing practical guidance about managing the family dynamics that would inevitably result from challenging established patterns of financial exploitation. She emphasized that healthy relationships require mutual respect for individual financial autonomy, and that genuine family support should enhance rather than compromise personal financial security. Her analysis of my family's reaction to my resistance provided valuable insight into the psychology of financial manipulation within family systems. Dr. Richardson explained that families who have become comfortable exploiting one member's success often respond to boundary-setting efforts with increased pressure and emotional manipulation designed to restore the previous dynamic. The key to successfully establishing healthier relationships was maintaining consistent boundaries regardless of temporary increases in family tension or disappointment. The conversation with Dr. Richardson included specific strategies for managing vendor commitments that had been made without my authorization, communicating with family members about sustainable financial contribution levels, and protecting my long-term financial security while maintaining family relationships that could be preserved through honest communication and mutual respect. She emphasized that my professional achievements represented personal success that belonged to me, rather than shared family resources that could be allocated according to other people's priorities. Most importantly, Dr. Richardson validated my growing recognition that the wedding financial arrangements represented a test case for my willingness to continue accepting exploitation versus establishing boundaries that would protect my individual success and autonomy. She explained that family members who genuinely supported my achievements would want to celebrate my success rather than exploit it, and that relationships requiring financial sacrifice to maintain harmony were fundamentally unhealthy and unsustainable. The week following these conversations brought additional pressure from various family members who had apparently been informed about my resistance to ongoing wedding financial commitments. My father called to express concern about potential wedding disruptions and to emphasize the importance of family unity during Victoria's engagement period. His conversation focused on the business and social benefits that Victoria's successful marriage would create for our entire family, while minimizing the personal financial sacrifice that achieving these benefits required from me. The coordination of these family interventions revealed the systematic nature of the pressure being applied to restore my compliance with the established financial exploitation pattern. Each conversation emphasized different aspects of my obligation to support Victoria's wedding, while consistently avoiding acknowledgement that the financial burden being placed on me was neither reasonable nor sustainable. The cumulative effect was designed to make me feel selfish and unsupportive for prioritizing my own financial security over family harmony and Victoria's happiness. My Aunt Rebecca, my mother's sister, provided an unexpected perspective during a phone conversation that had been positioned as neutral family outreach, but quickly revealed its true purpose as another intervention designed to encourage my continued financial compliance. Aunt Rebecca's approach was more sophisticated than the direct pressure I had been receiving from my immediate family, focusing on my reputation within the extended family and the potential long-term consequences of appearing unsupportive during Victoria's wedding preparations. The conversation with Aunt Rebecca was particularly revealing because it demonstrated how thoroughly the narrative about my financial obligations had been communicated throughout the extended family network. She had been informed that I was considering withdrawing support for Victoria's wedding due to personal financial concerns, a characterization that transformed my resistance to unauthorized commitments into selfish abandonment of family responsibilities. The manipulation of information being shared with other family members was designed to create social pressure that would encourage my return to compliance with ongoing financial demands. My response to Aunt Rebecca provided an opportunity to present accurate information about the financial exploitation that had been occurring and to establish a different narrative about my actual position regarding Victoria's wedding support. I explained the systematic expansion of financial commitments without my authorization, the cumulative burden that these expenses represented for my personal financial planning, and my willingness to contribute reasonable amounts that had been discussed and agreed upon through honest family communication. The conversation revealed that other family members had not been informed about the true scope of the financial arrangements that had been made on my behalf, or the sophisticated manipulation, tactics that had been used to establish my responsibility for covering expenses that exceeded my parents' budget. Aunt Rebecca's surprise at learning about the unauthorized vendor commitments and the total financial burden being placed on me suggested that the information being shared with extended family had been carefully managed to present my resistance as unreasonable rather than as appropriate response to systematic exploitation. The cumulative effect of these family interventions was to clarify the stakes involved in my decision about whether to continue accepting financial exploitation or to establish boundaries that would protect my individual success and autonomy. The wedding had become a battleground for determining whether my professional achievements would continue being treated as family resources or whether I would finally claim the respect and equal treatment that my contributions and success had earned. The family emergency meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at my parents' house, ostensibly to discuss wedding coordination, but clearly designed as a final intervention to restore my compliance with the financial arrangements that had been systematically established without my consent. My mother's phone call announcing this gathering carried undertones of ultimatum rather than invitation, with language emphasizing the importance of family unity and the potential consequences of allowing personal concerns to disrupt Victoria's wedding preparations. I arrived at the meeting armed with comprehensive documentation of all wedding-related expenses that had been attributed to me, vendor communications that revealed the unauthorized nature of many commitments, and financial analysis demonstrating the unsustainable burden these obligations represented for my personal planning objectives. The preparation reflected my professional training in negotiation and conflict resolution, approaching this family confrontation with the same systematic analysis I would apply to complex business disputes. The living room arrangement revealed the carefully orchestrated nature of this intervention. My parents occupied their usual positions in matching armchairs that provided natural authority positioning, while Victoria and James sat together on the sofa in a configuration that emphasized their united front as the engaged couple whose happiness was at stake. I was directed to the single chair positioned opposite this family coalition, creating physical dynamics that reinforced the adversarial nature of the conversation that would follow. My father opened the meeting with prepared remarks about family, values, and mutual support during important life transitions, emphasizing the temporary nature of wedding expenses compared to the lasting benefits that successful family celebrations create for everyone involved. His presentation was polished and emotionally compelling, drawing upon decades of experience in construction industry negotiations where relationship management and persuasion tactics determined project success and client satisfaction. The substance of his argument focused on the collaborative nature of family financial planning and the importance of each member contributing according to their capabilities and resources during significant life events. He acknowledged that wedding expenses had exceeded initial budget projections, but characterized these increases as natural consequences of creating celebration quality that would reflect appropriately on our family's social position and values within the Charlotte business community. My father's presentation concluded with direct appeal to my sense of family loyalty and sisterly affection, emphasizing Victoria's reliance on my support during this important period and the potential damage that financial restrictions could create for her wedding plans and emotional well-being. His approach was sophisticated in its combination of logical argumentation with emotional manipulation, designed to make resistance seem both unreasonable and harmful to family relationships. Victoria's contribution to the intervention was primarily emotional, focusing on her disappointment and confusion about why wedding budget concerns had become contentious when family celebrations should naturally bring everyone together in support of shared happiness. Her presentation revealed genuine distress about potential wedding modifications, though her understanding of the financial realities remained limited due to her continued protection from the true scope and cost of the arrangements being made on her behalf. The most revealing aspect of Victoria's remarks was her assumption that family members would naturally prioritize her wedding happiness over individual financial concerns, reflecting a level of entitlement that had been carefully cultivated through years of preferential treatment and protection from practical consequences of her lifestyle choices. Her emotional appeal was designed to make me feel responsible for any wedding disappointment that might result from enforcing reasonable financial boundaries. James's participation in the intervention provided additional insight into the social dynamics that were driving the pressure for elaborate wedding arrangements. His comments focused on the expectations within his family's social circle and the importance of maintaining celebration standards that would appropriately represent both families' positions within Charlotte's business and social community. The wedding was serving multiple functions beyond celebrating Victoria's marriage, including establishing business relationships and social connections that would benefit both families' long-term interests. My mother's presentation was the most sophisticated and manipulative component of the intervention, combining detailed wedding planning logistics with carefully crafted emotional appeals designed to restore my compliance with established financial arrangements. She had prepared a comprehensive overview of remaining wedding tasks and expenses, presenting this information in ways that emphasized the collaborative nature of family contributions while minimizing the disproportionate financial burden being placed on me. Her approach included specific examples of how my financial contributions had enabled wedding enhancements that would create lasting memories for Victoria, while reflecting positively on our family's generosity and commitment to excellence. The presentation was designed to make me feel proud of my contributions, rather than exploited by the systematic expansion of my financial responsibilities without explicit authorization or agreement. The most manipulative aspect of my mother's presentation was her characterization of my recent resistance to unauthorized vendor commitments as temporary stress response, rather than legitimate concern about financial exploitation. She suggested that my professional responsibilities and personal financial planning goals were creating anxiety that was affecting my ability to maintain appropriate perspective about family obligations and wedding celebration priorities. When the formal presentations concluded and discussion began, I presented my documentation of unauthorized vendor commitments and financial analysis, demonstrating the unsustainable nature of the expenses being attributed to me. The systematic nature of the financial exploitation became clear through detailed review of vendor communications that revealed how my responsibility for various expenses had been established without my knowledge or consent. My presentation included specific examples of how wedding planning decisions had been made based on the assumption that I would provide whatever funding was necessary, rather than through honest communication about available resources and sustainable contribution levels. The pattern of presumptive financial commitments had created obligations that exceeded any reasonable expectation of family support, while providing no comparable benefit to my own financial security or personal objectives. The family's response to this documentation revealed the extent to which they had become comfortable with the exploitation pattern and viewed my resistance as unreasonable disruption rather than appropriate boundary setting. My father's reaction focused on the potential embarrassment that refusing to honor vendor commitments would create within the business community, while my mother emphasized the emotional impact that wedding modifications would have on Victoria's happiness and celebration memories. Victoria's response was primarily emotional distress, about the possibility that her wedding vision might require adjustment to accommodate realistic financial constraints. Her reaction demonstrated how completely she had been protected from understanding the true cost of her preferences and the extent to which other family members were being expected to sacrifice their financial security to fund her elaborate celebration plans. The most significant aspect of the family's response was their inability to acknowledge the legitimacy of my concerns about financial exploitation or to engage seriously with the documentation I had provided about unauthorized vendor commitments. Instead, the conversation consistently returned to emotional appeals about family loyalty and wedding happiness, avoiding substantive discussion about sustainable financial arrangements or fair distribution of wedding expenses. My presentation of alternative solutions that would reduce overall wedding costs while maintaining celebration quality was dismissed without serious consideration. Suggestions about vendor negotiations, service modifications, or guest list adjustments that could achieve significant savings were characterized as compromising Victoria's happiness rather than as reasonable approaches to managing expenses within available family resources. The meeting reached its climax when I stated clearly that I would not be providing additional funding beyond the amounts I had explicitly agreed to contribute, and that future wedding expenses would need to be managed within my parents' actual budget rather than through continued expansion of my financial obligations. This boundary-setting statement created immediate emotional reactions from all family members present, revealing the extent to which my compliance with financial demands had been assumed rather than requested. My mother's response to this boundary setting was the most sophisticated manipulation I had experienced throughout the entire wedding planning process. She expressed deep disappointment that I would prioritize money over family relationships, while simultaneously suggesting that my professional success had created personality changes that were affecting my ability to maintain appropriate family values and priorities. Her emotional appeal focused on the temporary nature of wedding expenses, compared to the permanent damage that financial restrictions could create for family relationships and Victoria's wedding memories. The presentation was designed to make me feel guilty about protecting my financial security while appearing selfish and unsupportive during Victoria's most important life celebration. The meeting concluded with my family's clear expectation that I would reconsider my position after reflection about the potential consequences of disrupting Victoria's wedding plans. No acknowledgement was provided regarding the legitimacy of my concerns about financial exploitation, nor was any discussion offered about sustainable arrangements that would respect my financial boundaries while still supporting Victoria's celebration, within reasonable limits. The drive home from this family intervention provided time to process the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had been employed and to recognize the extent to which my family had become invested in maintaining financial arrangements that prioritized their goals over my individual success and security. The systematic nature of the pressure applied during the meeting revealed that challenging established exploitation patterns would require sustained resistance against coordinated family efforts to restore previous dynamics. Dr. Richardson's analysis of the family meeting during our next mentorship session provided professional perspective on the intervention tactics that had been employed and validation of my decision to maintain financial boundaries despite intense emotional pressure. She explained that families engaged in systematic exploitation often respond to boundary-setting efforts with increased manipulation designed to restore previous compliance patterns. Her guidance focused on recognizing the difference between genuine family support and emotional manipulation designed to maintain exploitation, emphasizing that healthy relationships should enhance rather than compromise individual success and financial security. The sophisticated nature of my family's intervention tactics confirmed that the financial arrangements represented systematic abuse rather than temporary wedding planning challenges. The conversation with Dr. Richardson included practical strategies for maintaining established boundaries despite ongoing family pressure, managing potential social consequences within extended family and community networks, and protecting my professional reputation from any attempts to characterize my resistance as selfish or unsupportive behavior. Most importantly, she validated my growing recognition that the wedding financial arrangements represented a defining moment for my relationship with my family, requiring clear choice between continued acceptance of exploitation or establishment of boundaries that would protect my individual achievements and autonomy, regardless of temporary relationship disruption. The days following the family meeting brought additional pressure through various communication channels designed to wear down my resistance to the established financial arrangements. My mother began sending daily text messages with wedding planning, updates that consistently emphasized time-sensitive decisions requiring immediate financial commitments, while Victoria called regularly to express anxiety about potential wedding modifications that might disappoint her guests or compromise her celebration vision. These ongoing pressure tactics revealed the extent to which my family had become dependent on my financial contributions for maintaining their social and lifestyle aspirations, while simultaneously refusing to acknowledge that their expectations exceeded reasonable limits of family support. The systematic nature of the manipulation confirmed that successful boundary setting would require sustained resistance against coordinated efforts to restore previous exploitation patterns. The most challenging aspect of maintaining my position was recognizing that the family relationships I had valued throughout my adult life were fundamentally built on my willingness to provide financial resources rather than on genuine appreciation for my individual achievements and contributions. The wedding financial crisis was revealing the transactional nature of family dynamics that I had previously interpreted as mutual love and support. The retaliation began within 48 hours of the family meeting, manifesting through calculated, social and professional pressure designed to isolate me from support systems while creating consequences that would encourage abandonment of the financial boundaries I had established. My mother's response was particularly sophisticated, utilizing her extensive network within Charlotte's business and social communities to create a narrative that portrayed my wedding contribution limitations as evidence of personal problems that were affecting my family relationships and professional judgment. The first indication of this coordinated campaign emerged during a routine client meeting at Meridian Financial Group, where Robert Harrison, a longtime client whose wife belonged to the same country club as my mother, made unexpected comments about family stress and its potential impact on professional performance. His remarks were positioned as friendly concern rather than direct criticism, but the underlying message was clear that information about my wedding contribution disputes had been communicated within social circles that could influence my professional reputation and client relationships. Mr. Harrison's comments included specific references to the importance of family harmony during significant life events and the potential career consequences when personal conflicts create questions about judgment and priorities. His approach was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while delivering a clear warning that my resistance to family financial expectations was being discussed within professional networks that could affect my advancement opportunities and client development prospects. The sophistication of this professional pressure tactic revealed the extent to which my mother had analyzed my career vulnerabilities and developed strategies to leverage my success against my resistance to ongoing exploitation. The financial services industry in Charlotte operated through interconnected social and business relationships, where reputation and personal character assessments significantly influenced professional opportunities and client trust levels. My mother's social campaign extended beyond professional networks to include extended family communications that systematically misrepresented my position regarding Victoria's wedding contributions. Phone calls from aunts, cousins, and family friends increased dramatically, each conversation following similar patterns of expressing concern about my apparent withdrawal of support during Victoria's engagement period, while emphasizing the importance of family unity during significant celebrations. These extended family interventions revealed how thoroughly my mother had managed information distribution to create a narrative that characterized my boundary setting as selfish abandonment rather then reasonable response to financial exploitation. The conversations consistently avoided acknowledging the unauthorized nature of many vendor commitments or the disproportionate financial burden that had been placed on me without explicit agreement or consultation. Aunt Margaret, my father's eldest sister who had always maintained neutral positions in family conflicts, provided the most revealing example of how information was being manipulated to generate pressure for restored compliance. Her phone call began with expressions of surprise and disappointment about my apparent reluctance to support Victoria's wedding, referencing specific details about vendor cancellations and budget reductions that had allegedly resulted from my financial restrictions. The accuracy of these details confirmed that my family was actively communicating with wedding vendors about modifications that would be required if my financial contributions were not forthcoming, creating a narrative of disruption and disappointment that could be attributed directly to my resistance. This vendor communication strategy was designed to create additional pressure through anticipated embarrassment about wedding modifications, while potentially generating professional consequences if vendor relationships were damaged. My conversation with Aunt Margaret provided an opportunity to present accurate information about the financial arrangements that had been made without my authorization, and the systematic expansion of my obligations beyond any reasonable family contribution expectations. Her surprise at learning about the unauthorized vendor commitments and the total financial burden being attributed to me suggested that extended family members had received carefully edited information designed to support my parents' preferred narrative. The revelation that other family members had been systematically misinformed about the true nature of the wedding financial arrangements confirmed the sophisticated manipulation campaign that was being employed to restore my compliance. The social isolation tactics were designed to make me feel unsupported and unreasonable, while creating external pressure through professional and family networks that could influence my decision-making process. Victoria's behavior during this period reflected her continued protection from the full reality of the financial manipulation while being encouraged to express disappointment and anxiety about potential wedding modifications. Her daily phone calls combined emotional appeals about sisterly support with specific concerns about vendor services that might be canceled or reduced if additional funding was not provided. The most troubling aspect of Victoria's communications was her apparent genuine belief that family members should naturally prioritize her wedding happiness over individual financial concerns. Her emotional distress seemed authentic rather than manipulative, suggesting that she had been carefully insulated from understanding the exploitative nature of the financial arrangements while being encouraged to maintain unrealistic expectations about family support obligations. These conversations with Victoria revealed how my parents had managed information and expectations to create maximum pressure on me while protecting her from recognizing the unfairness of the underlying arrangements. Her sincere appeals for continued support were more emotionally challenging than direct manipulation tactics because they reflected genuine disappointment rather than calculated pressure. The professional consequences of the family conflict intensified when Patricia Caldwell, a senior partner at Morrison & Associates and longtime friend of my mother, requested a meeting to discuss what she described as concerns about personal stress affecting work performance. The meeting was positioned as mentorship and support rather than disciplinary action, but the underlying message was clear that information about family conflicts was being monitored and evaluated for potential professional implications. Ms. Caldwell's approach was diplomatically phrased but substantively threatening, focusing on the importance of maintaining personal stability and family relationships that supported rather than compromised professional effectiveness. Her comments included specific references to client relationship management and the potential impact that personal conflicts could have on judgment and decision-making capabilities in financial advisory roles. The conversation revealed how thoroughly my mother had analyzed my career vulnerabilities and developed strategies to create professional consequences that would encourage restoration of family financial compliance. The interconnected nature of Charlotte's business and social communities provided multiple channels through which pressure could be applied while maintaining plausible deniability about direct retaliation tactics. My response to Ms. Caldwell focused on maintaining professional boundaries while providing sufficient information to address any legitimate concerns about work performance or client relationship management. I acknowledged the challenging nature of family financial discussions while emphasizing my commitment to maintaining the highest professional standards regardless of personal circumstances. The meeting concluded with Ms. Caldwell's suggestion that personal counseling or stress management resources might be beneficial for managing family relationship challenges, positioning my resistance to financial exploitation as evidence of personal problems rather than reasonable boundary setting. The sophisticated nature of this professional pressure confirmed that my family had developed comprehensive strategies for creating consequences that would encourage restored compliance. Dr. Richardson's analysis of these escalating pressure tactics during our next mentorship session provided professional perspective on the systematic campaign being employed to undermine my boundary-setting efforts. She explained that sophisticated manipulators often respond to resistance by creating external consequences designed to make compliance seem preferable to continued conflict and isolation. Her guidance emphasized the importance of maintaining established boundaries despite increasing pressure, while developing strategies to protect professional reputation and manage social isolation during the transition period required for establishing healthier family dynamics. The comprehensive nature of the pressure campaign confirmed that successful boundary maintenance would require sustained resistance against coordinated efforts across multiple life domains. The conversation with Dr. Richardson included specific strategies for managing professional relationships during family conflicts, documenting any attempts to influence career opportunities through personal relationship manipulation, and maintaining client service excellence while addressing family financial disputes. Her validation of my position provided essential support during a period when all other relationships were being systematically compromised. Most importantly, Dr. Richardson emphasized that the escalating pressure tactics confirmed the systematic nature of the financial exploitation and validated the necessity of maintaining boundaries regardless of temporary consequences. The sophisticated manipulation campaign revealed the extent to which my family had become dependent on my financial resources while refusing to acknowledge the unsustainable nature of their expectations. The wedding timeline was creating additional urgency in the pressure campaign, with vendor payment deadlines and final arrangement confirmations requiring immediate decisions about financial commitments. My mother began sending daily updates about time-sensitive wedding decisions that required immediate funding authorization, creating artificial deadlines designed to force compliance without adequate consideration time. These urgency tactics were coordinated with increased emotional pressure from Victoria, who expressed growing anxiety about potential wedding modifications, while emphasizing the embarrassment and disappointment that vendor cancellations would create for both families. The combination of professional consequences, social isolation, and time pressure was designed to make compliance seem preferable to continued resistance. The most challenging aspect of this escalation period was maintaining confidence in my boundary-setting decisions while managing the cumulative stress of coordinated pressure across all relationship domains. The systematic nature of the manipulation campaign created doubt about whether my resistance was reasonable or whether I should prioritize family harmony over financial security and personal autonomy. James's family became involved in the pressure campaign through communications that emphasized their expectations regarding wedding celebration quality and the potential embarrassment that budget modifications could create within their social circles. These external family pressures added another dimension to the manipulation tactics, while revealing how the wedding was serving multiple social and business functions beyond celebrating Victoria's marriage. The involvement of James's family in how the financial pressure campaign confirmed that my parents had expanded their manipulation strategy to include social consequences that could affect Victoria's relationship and marriage prospects. This escalation revealed the extent to which they were willing to risk Victoria's actual happiness to maintain pressure for my continued financial compliance. The cumulative effect of these escalating pressure tactics was to create a comprehensive campaign designed to isolate me from support systems while generating professional, social, and family consequences that would encourage abandonment of established financial boundaries. The sophisticated nature of the manipulation confirmed that successful resistance would require sustained determination and professional support during an extended transition period. My recognition that this level of manipulation represented fundamental character issues within my family relationships marked a turning point in my understanding of the situation. The wedding financial crisis was revealing that the family dynamics I had accepted throughout my adult life were built on exploitation rather than genuine mutual support and respect. The ultimatum arrived on a Wednesday morning in April, delivered through a carefully orchestrated three-way phone call between my mother, Victoria, and myself that was designed to present final terms for my continued participation in the wedding celebration. The conversation was positioned as a last opportunity for family reconciliation, but the underlying structure revealed sophisticated manipulation tactics intended to force immediate compliance with financial demands while creating maximum emotional pressure through coordinated appeals from multiple family members. My mother's presentation of the ultimatum was structured as a comprehensive summary of outstanding wedding obligations that required immediate resolution to prevent significant disruption to Victoria's celebration plans. The financial commitments that had been made on my behalf totaled $28,000, representing a substantial increase from previous calculations due to additional vendor services that had been authorized during the weeks of family conflict and boundary-setting discussions. The escalation in financial obligations revealed how my resistance to unauthorized commitments had been interpreted as temporary negotiation tactics rather than permanent boundary establishment. My family had continued making wedding arrangements based on the assumption that sufficient pressure would eventually restore my compliance with whatever funding levels were required to achieve their celebration vision. Victoria's contribution to the ultimatum conversation focused on the emotional devastation that wedding modifications would create during what should be the happiest period of her life. Her appeals combined genuine distress about potential celebration, compromises with calculated pressure, designed to make me feel responsible for any disappointment that might result from enforcing reasonable financial boundaries. The most manipulative aspect of Victoria's presentation was her apparent genuine belief that family members should naturally prioritize her wedding happiness over individual financial security and personal autonomy. Her emotional appeals reflected years of conditioning that had established her expectations as the primary consideration in family decision-making processes, while my achievements and contributions were consistently treated as resources available for supporting other people's goals and preferences. The ultimatum structure included specific deadlines for vendor payments and final arrangement confirmations that would create irreversible commitments requiring my financial participation regardless of any subsequent boundary-setting efforts. The timeline was designed to prevent adequate consideration time while creating artificial urgency that would encourage compliance without thorough analysis of long-term implications. My mother's presentation of these deadlines emphasized the potential embarrassment and social consequences that would result from vendor cancellations or service modifications during the final wedding preparation period. The professional relationships with caterers, photographers, and other service providers were characterized as essential business connections that could be permanently damaged if payment commitments were not honored according to established agreements. The sophistication of this ultimatum strategy revealed extensive planning and coordination designed to create maximum pressure while maintaining the appearance of reasonable family discussion about celebration logistics. The timing, structure, and emotional appeals were carefully orchestrated to make resistance seem selfish and destructive, while compliance appeared to be the only viable option for preserving family relationships and protecting Victoria's happiness. My response to this ultimatum marked the most significant boundary-setting moment in my adult relationship with my family. Rather than engaging with the emotional manipulation or accepting the presumptive financial obligations, I presented a clear statement of my actual willingness to contribute to Victoria's wedding within reasonable limits that respected my financial autonomy and personal objectives. I explained that my original offer to contribute $3,000 toward floral arrangements remained available, but that the systematic expansion of financial commitments without my authorization represented exploitation that could not continue regardless of emotional pressure or family consequences. The unauthorized vendor obligations totaling $28,000 exceeded any reasonable expectation of family support and would require significant modification or alternative funding sources. The immediate reaction to this boundary statement revealed the extent to which my family had become dependent on my financial resources for maintaining their social aspirations and lifestyle preferences. My mother's response combined shock and anger at my refusal to honor commitments that had been made on my behalf, while Victoria expressed emotional devastation about potential wedding modifications that would compromise her celebration vision. The conversation deteriorated rapidly as my family realized that continued pressure tactics would not restore my compliance with the financial arrangements they had established. My mother's language became increasingly direct and threatening, focusing on the potential consequences for family relationships and my reputation within the community if I persisted in disrupting Victoria's wedding plans. Victoria's emotional appeals intensified to include accusations that my financial restrictions demonstrated lack of love and support during the most important period of her life. Her distress appeared genuine rather than calculated, reflecting her protection from understanding the exploitative nature of the financial arrangements while being encouraged to maintain unrealistic expectations about family obligation levels. The ultimatum conversation concluded with my mother's announcement that my continued resistance to family financial obligations would require serious evaluation of my role in Victoria's wedding celebration and ongoing family relationships. The GI threat was positioned as natural consequence of my choices rather than retaliation for boundary setting, but the underlying message was clear that compliance was required for maintaining family connection and participation. The immediate aftermath of this confrontation brought a temporary cessation of daily pressure communications, while my family apparently regrouped to develop alternative strategies for managing the financial crisis that my boundary setting had created. The silence was more unsettling than the previous constant pressure because it suggested that more significant consequences were being planned and coordinated. Dr. Richardson's analysis of the ultimatum conversation during our next mentorship session provided professional perspective on the sophisticated manipulation tactics that had been employed and validation of my decision to maintain established boundaries despite escalating family pressure. She explained that ultimatums represent desperate attempts to restore control when manipulation targets demonstrate sustained resistance to exploitation patterns. Her guidance emphasized that the timing and structure of the ultimatum confirmed the systematic nature of the financial manipulation, while revealing the extent to which my family had become dependent on my resources for achieving their social and lifestyle objectives. The emotional intensity of their reaction to boundary setting demonstrated that genuine family support had been replaced by transactional relationships that prioritized my financial contributions over my individual well-being and autonomy. The conversation with Dr. Richardson included specific strategies for managing the potential consequences of maintained boundary setting, including family relationship modifications, social isolation within extended networks, and professional implications of continued family conflict. Her emphasis was on preparing for short-term difficulties while protecting long-term financial security and personal integrity that would provide foundation for healthier relationships in the future. Most importantly, Dr. Richardson validated my recognition that the wedding financial crisis represented a defining moment for establishing my adult identity, independent of family exploitation patterns. The choice between continued compliance and boundary maintenance would determine whether my professional success would continue being treated as family resource or whether I would finally claim the respect and autonomy that my achievements had earned. The weekend following the ultimatum conversation brought unexpected insight into the true scope of my family's financial dependence on my contributions, when my father requested a private meeting to discuss what he characterized as serious family business matters. The conversation revealed that wedding expenses represented only the most recent example of systematic financial exploitation that had been occurring for years without my conscious recognition. My father's explanation of family financial arrangements included details about ongoing expenses that had been subsidized through my contributions to various celebrations, emergencies, and lifestyle preferences that exceeded my parents' actual income capacity. The wedding financial crisis had exposed broader patterns of dependency that extended far beyond Victoria's celebration to include regular subsidization of family expenses that enabled maintenance of social position and lifestyle standards. This revelation transformed my understanding of family dynamics that I had interpreted as occasional requests for assistance, but actually represented systematic financial exploitation that had enabled my parents to maintain appearances and social connections that exceeded their genuine resource capacity. My professional success had become the foundation for family financial stability, while providing minimal recognition or appreciation for the sacrifices these contributions required. The conversation with my father included his acknowledgement that Victoria's wedding expenses had exceeded reasonable family celebration budgets. But his explanation focused on the social and business benefits that successful celebration would create for our entire family rather than on the fairness of expecting me to fund arrangements that primarily benefited other people's objectives and relationships. His appeal for continued financial support emphasized the temporary nature of wedding expenses, compared to the permanent damage that vendor cancellations and celebration modifications could create for family reputation and business relationships. Within the Charlotte community, the wedding was serving multiple functions beyond celebrating Victoria's marriage, including establishing social connections and business opportunities that would benefit my father's construction company and my mother's community involvement activities. The most revealing aspect of this conversation was my father's genuine surprise at my resistance to ongoing financial arrangements that he had apparently assumed would continue indefinitely based on my previous compliance and professional success. The systematic nature of the exploitation had become so normalized that questioning it seemed unreasonable rather than appropriate response to unsustainable financial demands. My response to my father's appeals focused on the distinction between voluntary family assistance and systematic exploitation that compromised my financial security while providing minimal benefit to my personal objectives and relationships. I explained that healthy family dynamics should celebrate individual success rather than treating it as shared resource available for funding other people's lifestyle preferences and social aspirations. The conversation concluded with my father's acknowledgement that wedding financial arrangements would require modification if my contributions were limited to explicitly agreed amounts, but his obvious disappointment about potential celebration compromises confirmed that my family had been planning based on continued access to my resources, regardless of the impact on my personal financial planning and autonomy. The implications of this broader financial dependency pattern extended far beyond the immediate wedding crisis to include recognition that establishing sustainable family relationships would require comprehensive boundary setting regarding all financial arrangements, rather than simply addressing the current celebration expenses. The wedding had become a catalyst for confronting systematic exploitation that had been gradually normalized over years of family interaction. My professional training in financial analysis provided useful perspective for evaluating the long-term implications of continued compliance versus boundary maintenance. The resources I had been contributing to family expenses and lifestyle subsidization represented substantial opportunity costs that affected my ability to invest in professional development, personal experiences, and financial security that would provide lasting value rather than temporary satisfaction for other people's preferences. The recognition that my financial contributions had enabled my family to maintain social position and lifestyle standards that exceeded their actual income capacity while providing no comparable investment in my own objectives created clarity about the exploitative nature of established arrangements. The wedding financial crisis was revealing broader patterns that would continue affecting my life until comprehensive boundaries were established and maintained, regardless of family pressure and consequences. The decision to maintain financial, Boundaries, despite escalating family pressure, represented a fundamental transformation in my understanding of healthy relationships and personal autonomy. The wedding had become a test case for whether my professional achievements would continue being treated as family property, or whether I would finally establish the respect and independence that my success had earned through individual effort and dedication. The silence that followed my definitive boundary statement lasted exactly 72 hours before my mother initiated the most calculated retaliation campaign I had ever experienced. The systematic nature of her response revealed extensive preparation and coordination designed to create comprehensive consequences across all aspects of my personal and professional life, while maintaining plausible deniability about direct punishment for my refusal to continue funding Victoria's wedding arrangements. The campaign began with my exclusion from family communication channels that had previously included routine updates about wedding planning progress, family gathering coordination, and general household information sharing. The exclusion was implemented gradually enough to appear natural rather than punitive, but the cumulative effect was complete isolation from family activities and decision-making processes that had previously acknowledged my participation and input. My mother's management of this exclusion demonstrated sophisticated understanding of psychological pressure tactics designed to create anxiety and uncertainty about my family status, while avoiding direct confrontation that might generate sympathy or support from extended family members. The isolation was positioned as natural consequence of my choices, rather than punishment for boundary setting, maintaining her narrative that family conflict resulted from my selfishness rather than exploitation. Resistance. Victoria's participation in this isolation campaign was particularly painful because her emotional distance appeared genuine rather than calculated, reflecting her continued protection from understanding the true nature of the financial arrangements, while being encouraged to interpret my boundary setting as abandonment during her most important life period. Her communications shifted from daily appeals for wedding support to complete absence of sisterly contact that eliminated our previously cherished relationship traditions. The professional implications of family conflict intensified when my mother activated her extensive network within Charlotte's business community to create career consequences designed to pressure restoration of financial compliance. The campaign was sophisticated enough to avoid direct sabotage while generating reputation, concerns, and relationship complications that could affect advancement opportunities and client development prospects. The most significant professional consequence emerged through Margaret Thornton, a senior executive at Carolina National Bank who served on several charitable boards with my mother and maintained influential connections throughout Charlotte's financial services industry. Ms. Thornton requested a meeting to discuss potential opportunities for expanded business collaboration, but the conversation quickly revealed underlying concerns about personal stability and family relationships that could affect professional judgment and client service reliability. Her approach was diplomatically structured but substantively threatening, focusing on the interconnected nature of business and personal reputation within Charlotte's professional community. Ms. Thornton explained that financial advisory relationships required absolute client confidence in personal integrity and stability, emphasizing how family conflicts could create questions about judgment and priorities that might compromise professional effectiveness. The conversation included specific references to recent discussions within professional networks about my apparent withdrawal from family obligations during Victoria's wedding preparations. The accuracy of these details confirmed that my mother had been systematically sharing information about family financial disputes with business associates who could influence my career trajectory and client relationships. Ms. Thornton's presentation concluded with suggestions about stress management resources and family counseling services that might help resolve personal conflicts affecting professional performance. The recommendations were positioned as supportive guidance rather than ultimatums, but the underlying message was clear that continued family discord could create consequences for business relationships and advancement opportunities within Charlotte's financial services community. My response to this professional pressure focused on maintaining appropriate boundaries while providing sufficient information to address legitimate concerns about work performance and client relationship management. I acknowledged the challenging nature of family financial discussions, while emphasizing my continued commitment to professional excellence and client service standards regardless of personal circumstances. The meeting revealed how thoroughly my mother had analyzed my career vulnerabilities and developed strategies to create professional consequences that would encourage restored financial compliance. The interconnected nature of Charlotte's business and social communities provided multiple channels through which pressure could be applied while maintaining sophisticated manipulation tactics that avoided direct retaliation acknowledgement. Dr. Richardson's analysis of these escalating professional consequences during our next mentorship session provided expert perspective on workplace retaliation tactics employed through family and social networks. She explained that sophisticated manipulators often utilize professional relationships to create career pressure when direct emotional appeals prove insufficient for maintaining exploitation patterns. Her guidance emphasized the importance of documenting any attempts to influence career opportunities through personal relationship manipulation while maintaining professional performance standards that would contradict narratives about personal instability or judgment concerns. The systematic nature of the professional pressure campaign confirmed the extent of my family's investment in maintaining financial access to my resources. The conversation with Dr. Richardson included specific strategies for managing client relationships during family conflicts, protecting professional reputation from manipulation attempts, and maintaining career advancement prospects despite coordinated pressure from family networks. Her validation of my boundary-setting decisions provided essential support during a period when professional consequences were being systematically implemented. Most importantly, Dr. Richardson emphasized that the escalating professional retaliation confirmed the systematic nature of family financial exploitation while demonstrating the lengths to which my family would extend manipulation efforts to restore access to my resources. The comprehensive nature of their response validated the necessity of maintaining boundaries regardless of temporary career complications. The social isolation tactics expanded beyond immediate family exclusion to include systematic information management that positioned my boundary setting as evidence of personal problems rather than reasonable response to financial exploitation. Extended family members received carefully edited updates about family conflicts that emphasized my apparent selfishness and withdrawal from support obligations while minimizing details about unauthorized financial commitments and exploitation patterns. Aunt Rebecca's phone call exemplified the sophisticated information management being employed to generate pressure from extended family networks. Her conversation began with expressions of concern about reports that I was experiencing personal difficulties that were affecting my ability to maintain family relationships and support obligations during Victoria's wedding preparations. The specific details she referenced about my alleged withdrawal from family support confirmed that information about financial disputes was being systematically shared with extended family members in ways designed to generate pressure for restored compliance. The narrative being communicated characterized my boundary setting as temporary stress response, rather than legitimate resistance to ongoing exploitation. My conversation with Aunt Rebecca provided an opportunity to present accurate information about the financial arrangements that had been made without my authorization, and the systematic expansion of obligations beyond reasonable family support. Expectations. Her surprise at learning about unauthorized vendor commitments and the total financial burden being attributed to me suggested that extended family had received incomplete information designed to support my parents' preferred narrative. The revelation that extended family members had been systematically misinformed about the true nature of wedding financial arrangements confirmed the sophisticated manipulation campaign being employed to isolate me from potential support sources. The social pressure tactics were designed to make me feel unreasonable and unsupported, while creating external consequences that would encourage restored financial compliance. Meanwhile, The wedding planning modifications that resulted from my boundary setting created additional pressure through vendor relationship complications and celebration adjustment requirements that affected Victoria's satisfaction with her upcoming celebration. My mother managed these modifications to maximize emotional impact while maintaining her narrative that financial restrictions, rather than original budget planning errors, were responsible for necessary changes. Victoria's emotional distress about wedding modifications was genuine and heartbreaking, reflecting her continued protection from understanding the exploitative nature of financial arrangements while being encouraged to maintain unrealistic expectations about celebration quality and family support obligations. Her disappointment about reduced floral arrangements, modified photography packages, and simplified reception elements created additional pressure for me to restore funding levels that would eliminate her distress. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.